I think that's why my ADHD saved me, is because I was never fearful of the change, of the new thing, of wanting to understand more, and the curiosity of, well, if this isn't working, this might. Hello, truth tellers, and welcome back to the ADHD Scapegoat Podcast, where we talk about everything ADHD and scapegoating. I'm Angie.
I'm Jeremy.
And today we're going to talk about how my ADHD diagnosis led me to self-awareness and growth, and the unexpected realization that all of my relationships were improving except for the ones with my family of origin, and why this topic is so important to ADHDers, especially those who are scapegoated. I named this Seeing Through the Lies, the ADHD Scapegoat's Superpower of Self-Awareness, because I feel like everything kind of leads back to self-awareness, not just those with ADHD, but all of us. Kind of understanding ourselves better is so important, and I know we bring it up many times over in all of the different shows, but how ADHD self-awareness changes relationships is actually, it's so beneficial, because you're learning how your symptoms, because everybody's ADHD symptoms show up differently. Everyone struggles with things on different levels, and everyone with ADHD has a different version of it. So being aware of how your ADHD symptoms impact your communication, your emotions, your behaviors is so important. And once you grow your self-awareness, the improvement with friendships, romantic relationships, work dynamics, all of those, it's such a huge shift once you grow that self-awareness. So some of the positive changes that I experienced is, better emotional regulation. I could tell, my intuition grew, and I could tell when something was happening, and instead of just reacting or responding after the fact, even though I always knew it was, now I'm like, okay, what's in my control, what isn't, and all those different levels of understanding your own emotional regulation. Improved communication, which we just talked about in the last episode, from you having anxiety and me having ADHD, and just being able to openly communicate, right? Mm-hmm. Setting boundaries is something that was a positive change. Here's the thing, I never called them boundaries before. Like, I've always kind of had them. I always had limits, and I stuck up for myself. I would call out abusive behaviors. I didn't just let things slide, and I wouldn't, I don't know, I hated the feeling of owing something to someone, or in I guess the side of resentment never added up for me. I'm not going to say this and then I'm going to resent them. That didn't make sense. I'd be like, they don't know why I'm mad. That made sense to me, rather than being oh, I'm just going to let this go until I explode, Right. That just never made sense to me. So I always asked for my needs to be met, even though they never were. But I always expressed it that way, but I never really knew that those were, boundaries. And I didn't clearly state them. And a lot of times, due to constantly being excluded, I would set a boundary, but I wouldn't actually hold it, right? So there's a different level of your self-awareness that helps you actually implement the change, especially around boundaries.
Do you think that you not holding on or resenting something is a result of your ADHD? Because you would not hold on to something, you would just say it? whether it's
Right.
impulsively or like you're just more vocal about things. You're not going to internalize it. You might think about it for a little while, but you're going to say something and not just hold on to resentment.
Well, it wouldn't make sense to me, like if it were happening to me, like if someone was, giving in, and I've had relationships like this, even in my family of origin, even where like there's people pleasing going on and like they're saying that they agree to something and then resenting me silently and never telling me about it is like, that doesn't make sense. Like, I don't even know what you're mad about. What did I do? So there's like different levels of like, I wouldn't want someone to feel like that from me because I've experienced that from someone else, and really there's a surprising confidence that comes from knowing yourself and being able to communicate those things. It's kind of like a similar experience to when you finally understand something that you haven't quite grasped, or like, hey, I've heard that before, and and then all of a sudden it clicks, and then you can't unsee it, and you're like, oh, I get it now. It's solved, mystery solved. It's just like that. There's like this confidence in being self-aware because you know your limits, that you've communicated fairly, so you can't be gaslit. There's, you're less able to be manipulated in these situations that are so confusing and cause chaos. Whereas once you have that self-reflection practice and you are self-aware and you continue to work on that, those things can't happen. They're like, there's such a spotlight on those things when they happen that it just it doesn't work anymore. So through self-awareness and your personal growth, that will threaten this toxic family system. And so that's where I began to understand when I started doing the work that I was noticing, especially because I didn't live at home anymore when I finally got diagnosed, but in my, friendships and relationships and work relationships, and also like just my work schedule and all those things, understanding my ADHD, all of those things were improving. And I was like really seeing the progress that I was making, and it was really empowering in those situations. So then when I would either talk to my family or get together with my family, it would just feel like I did no work at all. And it was so confusing because I'm like, I understand this, but they still don't understand. And they're still acting like I'm, being dramatic, or I'm too much, or I'm lying about, and it was just like, why haven't they grown with me? Or why don't they see who I am now? And so it was super confusing, and I would feel derailed and be like, okay, what else do I need to do? And that was a part that I think they used to their advantage, was that I didn't know what I didn't know, and so they could keep, manipulating it. And me wanting a connection with them, I kept going back to me. What can I be doing differently? How can I be showing up differently? How can I help them understand, right? And understanding not only my self-awareness, but understanding the scapegoat role. So that's that's the next level of your self-awareness, is the actual understanding and gaining the knowledge around these real relationship dynamics that go on. And being in that scapegoated role, I really needed to understand that it wasn't about me. It was about control. It was about their shame. But it's impossible to see that when you're a child. And it was still so confusing when I was an adult and I was like feeling all these positive things around my diagnosis, and then still coming up against this wall. And I know a lot of people, there's a lot of talk about when you step away from your family, you start your own families, you come together, there's always this dynamic that you always have, this familiarity with your family that you can kind of fall into. And in healthy families, they grow with you. And there might still be some like little jabs from when you were younger here or there or whatever, but like, I mean, you experienced it too from my family, like things that just went on that you were like, huh? Why are they treating her like this?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy to fall into those roles and feel really helpless when you haven't done the work, which I did for many years. And why toxic families resist change, even when it's healthy, is because it disrupts this dynamic that they've created. And usually it's to benefit the narcissist. And they feel comfortable in this dynamic because either it's all they've ever known, or it's been going on for years or decades within, certain relationships. So rather than go into this unknown that comes with change, they'll stay where it's unhealthy and comfortable. And so in their mind, it's more of like this change that you're kind of causing by doing the work, right?
It's a disruption.
Yeah, it's a threat.
Yeah.
It's like it is a threat to the stability that they feel in what they know currently, rather than risking the chance of it being more positive on the other side, right? And I think that's why my ADHD saved me, is because I was never fearful of the change, of the new thing, of wanting to understand more, and the curiosity of, well, if this isn't working, this might, I won't know until I try, right? And there's these unhealthy dynamics with some of these toxic people where they won't even go there. They don't have the courage to go there, really. The discomfort of breaking these unspoken family rules, which Val and I discussed during our podcast, some of them, like submission is required, like you have to cave to the narcissist. Vulnerability is dangerous. Feelings are wrong. You must take sides. Like appearance is more important than substance. Big one. And I mean, that's not the entire list, but calling out these dysfunctions or setting boundaries is not okay. Those are against these unspoken rules that you just learn. And there's a lot of studies that talk about abuse, like if obviously the word abuse or the word trauma is, actually used a lot now and actually being spoken about, so it can become kind of, pushed aside, oh, everything's abuse. But actually, if a child isn't, mentally, physically, or emotionally abused, but they're watching, say, their father abuse the mother, that child's being abused.
Right.
They're learning patterns. They're seeing, hey, if I stand up to him, he does this to her. Why wouldn't he do it to me, right? And so they're learning these patterns and they're internalizing them. And so, especially as a child, trying to break through these unspoken rules, it's impossible when you're a kid, because what you do is you try to keep yourself safe. And that's where my ADHD put me in harm's way, because I couldn't just sit back and allow it, and I would speak up, and I couldn't. Man, the submission one is really tricky, because I would just be like, why? I would just ask the questions. Why do I have to do that? Okay, what does that mean? And it was like, shut up, like just do it because I told you so, kind of a thing. And so that becomes ingrained as a child, and it's very hard to break. And for me, it isn't easy or comfortable to reparent yourself and do the work without a lived experience example of how that looks. But it's the only choice in my mind when it comes to abuse. There's just no other choice. Like, I'm not going to continue the abuse. I'm not going to continue this negative emotional and mental harm. I'm not going to do that to my kids. I know how I felt. I'm not going to do that. And so I will make the change. I will do the things. So that another threat to the family is when it comes to like gaslighting and invalidation, when you're like finally speaking out and shifting. So me and two of my siblings and myself, we received the message that the need to, for my parents, the need to blame us for your miserable childhood are just humiliating. We did not raise any of you to treat us with so much disrespect, and anything that's been said has been turned around and used against whoever said it. And that's a quote. And then we also got sent articles titled 10 Simple Reasons Why People Don't Mind Their Own Business. So they're trying to invalidate our experience and try to gaslight us into thinking that we perceived it wrong. This is actually what you're doing. Like, it's not disrespectful to hold someone accountable and ask a question. That's not disrespectful. But it's looked like that because you're not being submissive. And when growth is seen as a betrayal instead of progress, that's where speaking up and holding people accountable for their actions and asking those questions gets turned on its head. It's like they feel like it's a betrayal because they're not growing, they're not self-reflecting, they're not self-aware, right?
Right.
And why it feels so confusing to the ADHDer who just wants connection and believes that family should be your primary supporters. And so when that is the only place that the connection is still fractured and you're seeing all these other improvements, through doing the work, and your friendships are growing and you feel more connected, or you're able to communicate more authentically. Your work relationships and even tasks, like day-to-day tasks, are more enjoyable. You feel less frustrated because all those things are kind of coming together. But then you come to your family and it's like you go to this alternate universe where none of the work that you have done makes any difference at all. It's so confusing. And in the idea that the outside world can give you negative messaging based on behaviors, from way back when you were a kid. And even in my case, when I'm scapegoated, even as a kid, to other people outside the family, and I run into these situations where I'm always up against a wall where someone's judging me, negatively judging me incorrectly because of this narrative, it's really, really hard to break through that when this part that feels like it's the most important part is the most confusing. Mm-hmm. I want to end with how we work on healing, even though these people that, if it were up to you and you had this family of origin connection, when they won't even acknowledge it. So to understand their reaction does not define your progress. And that makes it so much more clear. And it was a really heartbreaking realization for me to finally come to, but it was also very clear. And it made me realize what a healthier place I was mentally. And it just hit me that I'm not the problem. I'm not doing anything. Also, another way to work with your healing is invest in those safe relationships. They're so important. The safe people in your life. And it's kind of hard at first to know who is safe and who isn't. And it takes a little bit of risk in opening up that authentic communication. But again, like we talked about in other episodes, start small. Start with something small to, earn that trust back, or, begin to trust someone. And these safe relationships are the most important part of the healing. When you don't have a safe person to turn to, it's hard to see things clearly. And that's why these unsafe or abusive people keep you isolated or in a state of confusion or chaos, because they don't want you to see things clearly. But when you're with safe people and you're allowed to see things clearly and you're allowed to openly communicate, it's how you grow, it's how you heal, it's how you become who you are. And another part is choosing acceptance choosing acceptance over seeking approval from those who won't change. So again, another heartbreaking thing to accept them, but it's not that you're accepting their behavior and that you're allowing it. It's that you're accepting that that's how they're showing up. When people show you who they are, believe them. And that is I don't know about you, but I think that is a huge step in actually being able to accept, not allow or excuse or, think that this, the behavior is okay, but just be like, that's what they're showing me. That's who they are. Mm-hmm. And even you hope and you wish it wasn't like this. And if it were your choice, that would not be the case. But everyone's in control of their own lives and they make their own choices, and you have to accept that, that sometimes those don't align.
And that's probably one of the hardest stages of the grieving process is acceptance, because you're fighting that acceptance.
Right.
But the only way you're going to heal is to get through that stage.
And when you don't accept it, that's when you keep trying to over-explain. That's when you're still in that stage of like, okay, they misunderstood. Let me try a different way. And it is this false hope that you're holding on to. And then when you finally accept it, you know what to do with it. You're able to step forward confidently in the reality of the situation instead of like, leaning on giving the benefit of the doubt to someone who doesn't deserve it.
Right. You can have a plan. You can come up with coping mechanisms or a plan to move past it when you're still in denial. You're still searching for answers. You're still offering ways to escape that role.
Right.
Right. You're looking for any hole you can poke in it. And it's not until you get to acceptance that you can actually come up with a plan to move forward.
Yeah, and I think there's also like a societal acceptance and assumption around like, oh, everybody's family loves them or whatever. So I think a lot of people carry shame when there's like these broken connections that were not their fault and are not their choice, but that is what it is. That's what we're dealing with. And pretending it doesn't exist doesn't make it better. It only gives this false image to other people. So people see, oh, they must be fine. I must just be struggling, even when maybe we're struggling with the same thing. So acceptance helps everyone. And it also, that could lead to accountability, because you're finally stepping back and you're not being accountable for all their feelings and all of the chaos that they're trying to cause. You're not holding that anymore. You're letting it go and letting it be with the person that's actually responsible. And some practical ways to stay grounded through your healing is journaling, therapy, coaching. Don't keep it bottled up or just follow old patterns and beliefs. And that's a big thing we do in coaching is understanding where those old beliefs are coming from, or, when you're holding certain expectations, or you're holding this belief, where's that coming from? Is that your voice? Is that your true? Is it like your core values? Is that where it's coming from? Or is this a message you received that you've never questioned? It's just ingrained. And sweeping things under the rug, bottling them up, people pleasing, and, holding on to resentment only makes your mental health, your physical health, and your relationships worse. So, and then the last step is taking the power of breaking the cycle for future generations. Now, it's funny, Whitney Goodman from the Calling Home podcast talked about this the other day too, where she said, there's cycle breakers that come forward and they're like, I don't want to have to be the cycle breaker. Like, it's exhausting. And like, why does this have to be up to me? I'm doing all the reparenting. I'm doing all this stuff, but like, I don't want the responsibility of breaking the cycle. Like, and yeah, there is a level of it. It's so unfair. And why couldn't, my parents done that? And there's anger behind that, right? But there's also, I think two things can be true, right? Like, yeah, to continue inflicting harm on others because you refuse to do self-reflection and become self-aware enough to notice that you are harming others with your actions, that's selfish and abusive. And there's no excuse to do that. So there is no other option. And yeah, it's exhausting, and it's not fair that I have to be the one to do it, but I'm also not willing to continue that.
Yeah, you don't want to accept the alternative. So as tough as it is, you are willing to put in the work.
Right.
Because it's necessary.
But it doesn't mean it's not something like I'm like gung-ho, so excited to have to do, right? Like, but I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do. But it doesn't mean it's not exhausting. It doesn't mean it's not draining. It doesn't mean that you have feelings of anger and grief and, why me? To, even that situation can kind of creep in because it's just like, geez, it's a lot. Mm-hmm. But it's worth it. And we talk about it, and we'll keep talking about it because it's a huge part of our awareness, understanding, and educating. That's the core of my coaching, is doing all of those steps to give yourself the most authentic and beautiful life. So, until next time.